This content is not suitable for children and may contain depictions of violence.
Hi, I'm your host Cambo. Grab a beer and pull up a deck chair. This is True Crime Island, and you know it's another true crime podcast. This week we have coronas all round. Well, the world is gripped in a panic at the moment over this coronavirus or COVID-19, so I thought why not do a case about another deadly corona, not the Toyota Corona. This is Juan Corona, serial killer. But first, I'm back from Thailand, currently undergoing 14 days ISO, which is like prison, but without the free food. But then again, I don't have to worry about dropping the soap. First up, thanks to everyone, we passed the first YouTube milestone of 500 subs. Thank you very much. Don't forget to share it out. Now, I've got some great location shots coming up from my recent travels. Here we are at Koh Samet Beach. So tonight, I'll be referencing the Sacramento Bee, the San Francisco Examiner, the New York Times, the Miami News, the Battleboro Reformer, Idaho State Journal, the Deviation Diaries, Blogspot, court records, and cross-reference with Juan Corona, the machete murderer, information researched and summarised by Tammy Boner, Holly Brickey, Melissa Bowles, Doug Crowder, and they're from the Department of Psychology at Radford University. Thank you, guys. So tonight we go to Feather River in Sutter County, California, and the year is 1971. Juan Vallejo Corona, born February 7, 1934 at Altland, Jalisco, Mexico. Well, he was a solid, dark-haired, dark-eyed man with heavy brows, 5'11" and rugged at 200 pounds or about 100 kilos. He could hardly speak English, not that many would know, as he rarely spoke to anyone in town. He went to church, and the Reverend Joseph Bishop, and what a name for a reverend, he said that Juan was a good man. Now, we don't know too much about Juan Corona, other than he had 8 brothers and a mother named Candida. That's nearly 2 6-packs of Coronas right there. Juan Corona illegally crossed the border into the USA from Guadalajara, Mexico, when he was 15 in around 1949. He stayed in the El Centro area in Southern California to work on a farm in 1949, aged 16. In 1951, he moved to Sacramento and worked as a member of the construction crew which built the Folsom Dam. One of his older brothers, Natividad, well, half-brother, was already living in the US at Marysville near Yuba City. Now, he immigrated in 1944 because of the labour shortage in World War II. In 1953, Natividad suggested Juan move into the area and work on the local ranches. Juan did this, and he would meet and marry his first wife, Gabriela Hermosillo. Now, that was in October 1953. Juan had a quick temper and he could be set off quite easily. In fact, when he'd get into a rage at home, they'd need to take ropes, tie him down until he chilled out. It was stated in court records that he had fits of temper, that he had beaten his wife, that he had little use for white transient labourers. Now, we'll get to this labourers thing a bit later. In 1955, there was a huge flood in the area and it overcame the West Levee, killing 74 people. Now, this traumatised Juan Corona quite a bit. And from what I can see, he was schizophrenic. And after the floods, he would go on about how everyone had died during the flooding. And he started reading from the Bible and he was writing shit down all the time. He moved to Live Oak in 1956 and became a farm labour contractor. His brother Natividad was worried about him and got him committed to the DeWitt State Hospital at Auburn, aged just 22. He was diagnosed as being confused, disorientated, and suffering from delusions and hallucinations. Here they would perform shock treatment on Juan, and in April of 1956 they discharged him as cured. But then he got deported. A mutual friend would introduce Juan Corona to his eventual second wife, Gloria Moreno. Now, Gloria was born in Mexico in 1935. She became a legal secretary and worked for the father of Mexican President Luis Echeverria Alvarez. Now, that was in the Palace of Justice in Guadalajara. She immigrated with her family to live in Live Oak area north of Yuba City in 1957. Now, he marries his second wife, Gloria Moreno, in Our Lady of Guadalupe Church in Live Oak on July the 4th, 1959, and they'd end up having 4 daughters. Juan made his way back to the USA in 1962, this time with a green card. Now, okay, there are conflicting stories out there with conflicting timelines and locations. What I've done, I've gone with what made the most sense. It's not really that important, this bit. Juan and his brothers Natividad, Felix and Pedro, they all started in the fields but progressed to become labour contractors, recruiting workers for the growers, taking about 10 to 15% of their pay, and they also sold them food. In March 1970, Corona was again admitted to a state hospital for treatment. Now we get to 1971, and this is where things get a little crazy. After the spring rains in 1971 started early and they lingered on later than usual, the work in the field slowed up. This, of course, caused problems not only for the labourers but for those that made their living contracting them out as Juan Corona did. Also, mechanisation had replaced most of the tomato harvesting staff required, and mechanical peach pickers were being introduced. The Sullivan Ranch, where Juan supplied labour to, had bought one of these automatic pickers, replacing 40 to 45 men that had worked there the year before. Now, earlier in the year, Juan Corona had applied for welfare at the Sutter County office, but was turned down because he had more than $600 in assets. So, he was in financial strife at the start of the year. The weather and the mechanisation of agricultural harvesting, this really put a strain on Juan Corona's mental state. On May the 4th, 1971, Marysville police stopped and questioned Juan about the missing Sigrid, or Pete Byerman. Now, he was a homeless guy that had last been seen by his friend Roy DeLong getting into Juan's van. Juan denied any knowledge of his whereabouts. DeLong was quoted as stating, "That's the last time I ever saw that guy Byerman. He was one of the best guys I ever knew." On May the 19th, 1971 at 10 a.m, a farmer, Goro Kagahiro, noticed a freshly dug hole about 2 feet deep and 6 feet long, but didn't think much about it until 6 p.m. in the afternoon, where he saw it filled in. He called police to come and have a look, as he thought it may have been stolen property buried there. When the sheriff came out and started digging, they found a toe. The body would be identified as Kenneth Whitaker, 40, from San Francisco. Whitaker had been dead probably less than 24 hours. On Tuesday the 25th of May at the Jack Sullivan Ranch, and that's about half a mile or a kilometre up the road from the first burial site, a farm worker noticed a mound in the field while riding the tractor. He thought it looked like a grave and called the sheriff, and yep, it was a grave. That's not all. They would find 4 more graves close together about 3/4 of a mile up the road, and 3 other bodies buried in the opposite direction. At 4 o'clock in the morning of May the 26th, 1971, police went to Corona's 3-bedroom home in 768 Richland Road, Yuba City, with a warrant for his arrest. They had found store receipts in a couple of the graves with Juan Corona's name on them. One was a receipt for $25.63 from a produce and meat firm, Del Perro Brothers, made out to Juan. Now this was found in the grave of John Doe number 3. When they entered the house, they woke up Martha, the 10-year-old daughter of Juan and Gloria, to translate the warrant. She was terrified as 2 police pointed rifles at Juan's head as he kneeled down handcuffed. She read out how certain men had been murdered, their bodies buried in fruit orchards, and they were here to arrest the murderer, Juan Corona. Initially, he would be charged with 9 counts of murder, but further searches of the surrounding area would turn up 25 bodies in total. 2 other bodies would be buried with bank slips in the name of Juan Corona. I mean, fuck's sake. All these murders occurred between February the 1st, 1971 and May 19, 1971. Just 4 months. Now this is from court records. All of the 25 victims, all but one, had incurred 1 or more chop type or hacking type injuries to the head. The chop wounds were of 2 kinds. Slashing wounds inflicted probably with a light weapon such as a knife, and severe chop wounds caused by a heavy instrument such as a bolo machete. The latter wounds typically appeared in a horizontal direction, covering the face, head and ear, and were inflicted with a force of such magnitude that they cut the bone and severed the upper and lower parts of the skull. The other common pattern was the infliction of stab wounds in the upper left chest of the victims by using a cutting instrument which penetrated the heart or lung and severed the aorta, leading from the heart to the lungs. The common modus operandi was further bolstered by the circumstances that the victims were buried in the same general area in a manner that was likewise similar, if not identical. Almost without exception, each of the victims was lying on his back with his hands over the head, chest or stomach, and his shirt or other clothes pulled over the head. Moreover, in at least 7 graves, the undies of the victims was pulled off or removed, exposing the penis and genital area, giving rise to the inference that the crimes may have been sexually motivated and that the perpetrator may have been a homosexual. Because of the salient likeness of the injuries inflicted, the instruments used and the mode of burial, there was a consensus on the part of all concerned that all the crimes charged were committed by the same person or persons. Autopsies revealed that all the victims had empty stomachs. Now, I was thinking maybe that was because they were held for a while before being raped and killed. None of the victims have been reported missing, as they were all transient workers or lived on Skid Row. Now, this did make initial identification of the bodies difficult, with 4 of the 24 victims still remaining unidentified. A search of Juan Corona's house uncovered a bolo machete, a 2.5-inch wooden club, which I'd say is a 2.5-inch golf club, with possible bloodstains on it, a post-hole digger with mud and hair on it, 2 ledger books. Now, the ledger book apparently contained the names of 34 alleged victims, the dates on which they were presumed murdered, and designation of the burial sites. So they discovered 24 bodies, but of course there could have been more. Evidence in the form of a plastic cast taken from tyre impressions found at Whitaker's grave showed that the tracks were made by the same kind of tyres that were on Corona's van. In the 25th grave, the burial ground of Joseph Maxack, the police discovered a number of sundry items, parts of a candle holder, pieces of broken mirror, a child's sock, and that belonged to Corona, and more importantly, 2 Bank of America deposit slips. Printed on the slips was Juan V. Corona, 768 Richland Road, Yuba City, California. In the kitchen of the Labour House, there was a glass candle holder sitting in the sink. It was 8 or 10 inches tall and about 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Now, the candle holder was made of red, green and yellow coloured glass, and there was writing on it in Spanish. The broken pieces of the glass candle holder found in the 25th grave bore great similarity to the candle holder seized in the mess hall. The colours, the design and the Spanish inscription of the broken glass all indicated unquestionable resemblance to the candle holder found during the search of the mess hall. In the corner of the mess hall was a locked metal desk. In the lower left-hand drawer was a 9mm Browning automatic pistol in a case. The gun, which had been purchased by Corona in 1967, was loaded, cocked and had 1 round in the chamber and 3 in the clip. The safety was also off. The searching officer removed the clip and ejected the shell from the chamber. It's worthy to note that the 11th victim, William Camp, was shot in the head with a pistol. Chemical analysis of the bullet in the head of that victim indicated that it had been manufactured by Remington, that it could have come from the same batch of bullets that were found in Juan Corona's desk, and that it matched bullets fired from Corona's gun in several respects. In the drawer with the gun was a long knife with a silver and black laminated handle. The knife was in a sheath. Now on one side of the knife blade were the words Tennessee toothpick. There appeared to be coagulated blood on that knife near the guard. A hunting knife in a leather sheath was found on the top shelf of some storage shelves along the west wall of the mess hall kitchen, wrapped in a Spanish magazine. The handle appeared to be laminated leather. The knife was lying between the pages of the magazine and could not be seen from the floor. Hanging on a nail in the kitchen were several receipts, including receipts from Del Perro Brothers, and that was made out to Juan Corona and signed at the bottom, Juan Corona. A subsequent search of the mess hall additionally produced a Universal brand V6 ink pen that wrote in 6 different colours. I had one of those at school, at 4 colours or whatever. Now the 5 colours of that ink on that so-called ledger that they had matched the colours from this pen. The additional circumstances shedding light on Corona's contact with the victims and his involvement in the crimes, we can summarise it as follows. Byron Shannon, another Labor contractor in the Marysville area, he testified that on May 3 or 4, 1971, he met John Henry Jackson, victim 21, who was looking for a job. Before they could come to any arrangement, Corona came by. After a short discussion, Jackson was hired by Corona, who drove him away in his pickup truck. Now this was the last time Shannon saw Jackson alive. A similar occurrence took place on May the 12th, 1971. On that occasion, Shannon was talking to Smallwood, Riley and Allen. Now they're victims 15, 16 and 17 in Lower Marysville. Corona drove up in a pickup truck and asked Smallwood, Allen and Riley if they wanted to work for him. They accepted the job offered by Corona and all left in his truck. Shannon never saw any of the 3 men again. On April 10, 1971, about 3:30 or 4 p.m, James Purvis, a farm labourer, was walking on the road between Yuba City and Marysville. Juan drove alongside the road and asked Purvis if he wanted to work for him for just a couple of hours. Purvis refused and Juan drove away after some hesitation. Now, evidence introduced at the trial showed that Juan in fact did not start providing labourers for thinning until about May 6. So this was April he's asking this guy for work. What work? There was no work. Jose Romero Raya testified that on the evening of February 24th, he was approached by Juan near the Guadalajara Cafe. Now, this cafe, which is now the Silver Dollar Saloon at 330 First Street, Marysville, funny enough, it has on its menu right now a Juan Corona chicken salad for $14.95. Anyway, Raya was with one Nick Ramirez. Juan asked the 2 men if they wanted to do some pruning work on the Sullivan Ranch the next day. On answering that they did not know where the Sullivan Ranch was, Juan volunteered to take the 2 men to the ranch in his pickup truck at that late hour. The evidence adduced at trial established that at the time Juan Corona offered Raya and Ramirez the pruning job on the Sullivan Ranch, he was neither contracting nor working at the ranch, and in fact, he'd not had a contract for pruning since the winter of 1968-69. Corona's activities around the grave sites were further described by two eyewitnesses, Jacob Compton and Ernesto Garcia. Compton was an engineer for the California Department of Water Resources working on the Sullivan Ranch from April through to June 1971. On April 28 or 29, Compton saw a light-coloured van in the area. The van showed up twice on the same day. At mid-morning, he saw the van come out of the brush into the bend of the river somewhat to the west of gravesite 21. In the afternoon, Compton saw the van travelling along the road in the same area. Garcia testified that in April 1971, he was operating a tractor with a chisel in the South River bottom prune orchard. Corona was working on the ranch that day, cutting trees near the camp. Corona approached Garcia and asked him how deep the chisel would go. Garcia told Corona the chisel went about 3 feet deep. Juan Corona put his hand next to the chisel and marked the dirt line which showed how deep the chisel penetrated the ground. Finally, the jury heard the testimony of Mrs. Beatrice Valdez, Juan Corona's neighbour in Yuba City. Mrs. Valdez worked in a yard almost every evening during January and February 1971. Now, she observed him driving past almost every evening somewhere between 6:45 and 7 and returning within 2 to 2.5 hours. Juan did not always use the same vehicle. Sometimes he drove the Impala, sometimes the van or the pickup. On returning, he usually washed his vehicle. However, as Mrs. Valdez often noticed, the job done by him was not complete. Instead of washing the car in full, he frequently did no more than hose the inside of the vehicles out. So pretty much Juan Corona was fucked. He tried to defend himself by saying he wasn't the killer, but it was his brother Natividad. Now, where this gets some credence is on the 25th of February 1970 at the Guadalajara Tavern in South Maryville's Skid Row. Now, this tavern was actually owned or operated by Natividad Corona. There was a Juan Jose Raya. Now, he was attacked in the restroom. Now, from what I can see, Natividad came onto Raya and his affections were rebuffed. Affection, erection, I don't know what it was. Anyway, Raya would be found in a pool of blood, hacked about the face by a machete. His lips were cut off and his brain was leaking out. Raya survived and testified in a civil suit that Natividad, whom he described as a homosexual, had made advances on him. The police report said Natividad was a queer, and if someone talking to Juan Corona about this subject, directed at his brother or not, Juan would go into one of his fits of temper. Now, at first, Juan said he was in Mexico at the time of the attack, but later he admitted he was at the cafe at that night. So Raya was awarded $250,000 against Natividad. So either Natividad attacked Raya or he took the heat for his brother Juan. Anyway, Natividad transferred all his property to his family and took off back to Mexico. Raya was never able to claim the money. So we got this asshole Juan Corona. He's got a hot temper, he bashes his wife, he has big issues with gay people, and he's in a bit of a financial situation because of the weather and mechanisation of the agricultural activities in the area. He's then turned down for welfare, he's got a history of mental illness and has had shock treatment, which I can only imagine would be terrifying. Now, this treatment was because he was delusional and hallucinating. He then goes on to pick up potential workers and it looks like rape, mutilate, but definitely murder them. It would take a jury 45 hours to find him guilty on 25 counts of first-degree murder. In fact, this was so well covered by the media that they had to hold this trial 60 miles away, or about 95 kilometres, in Fairfield, California, because it would have been too difficult to get a jury selected in Yuba. The judge, Richard Patton, he sentenced Corona to 25 terms of life imprisonment to run consecutively, without the possibility of parole. In January 1974, Gloria divorced Juan. Now, Juan did get a second trial in 1978, but basically there was no change in the outcome. Corona died on March the 4th, 2019, so it wasn't long ago, aged 85. He'd been denied parole several fucking times, which is good. Well, Islanders, why the fuck Juan decided to go all homicidal on his workers? Look, I really can't say, other than he was suffering from these delusions and he was under a lot of stress. I think he was also battling this all of his life over his own sexuality. The fact that it looked like he raped most, if not all of his victims, who were all male, yet got so upset when anyone mentioned his brother was gay. It tends to look like he wanted to take all that sexual identity, anxiety, all that hate out on others. He was done for 25 murders, but because of the transient nature or the fact that his victims were from Skid Row, there may have been many more, and there are theories that he did murder many more people. 4 of the victims are still John Doe's. Juan Vallejo Corona was in the end just a fucking scum. He did get on that karma bus to boom fuckalunga. He preyed on the most vulnerable people, taking out his anxieties on them in the most horrific way. At least the justice system sorted him out, and I hope he burns in hell. So I'll read out the names of those he brutally murdered. It was John Joseph Haluka, 52, Sigurd Pete Byman, 62, it was John Doe, 1, 2, 3 and 4. William Emery Camp, 62. He was the one shot in the head with a 9mm. There was Clarence Hocking, 53. There was Albert Leon Scratchy Hayes, 58. Warren Jeremy Kelly, 62. John Henry Jackson, 64. Joseph J. Maxick, 54. Mark Beverly Shields, 56. Donald Dale, or Red Smith, 60. James Wiley Howard, 64. Sam Bonafide, also known as Joe Caravo, 55. Edward Martin Cupp, 43. Charles Levy Fleming, 67. Jonah Raggio Smallwood, 56. Albert J.T. Riley, 45. Lloyd Wallace Wenzel, 60. Paul Buell Allen, 59. Raymond Rand Muchache, 47. Kenneth Edward Whitaker, 40. There was also Melford Everett Sample, 59. So that's the end of the show, and I should be back on schedule from now on. We'll try and get one of these videos out every week. So what do you reckon, Islanders? Crazy? All of a sudden, this guy starts killing people. He probably got such a kill streak because none of the victims were reported missing. If it had been schoolgirls, then he would have been shut down a lot faster for sure. So I hope that filled in some time for those people in ISO like me, and it looks like there's a few of us out there. So please comment as you see fit down below. Go to my website, whose link is in the description, and that has all the social media, iTunes links. There's merch, and of course the audio version of the podcast. I have over 100 other cases on there, and I will reboot a few of those into the video format. So that's it for tonight. I've been your host, Cambo. Good night, and as I always say, don't forget to delete your browser history. Boom fucker.